Hi, welcome to an introduction to environmental biology. This is Module 4 overview on biodiversity and evolution. So just to kind of give you a quick introduction, this is E.O. Wilson. He is still traveling to this day, most of the days of the year, giving lots and lots of lectures and talks about the importance of biological diversity and how we need to certainly understand biological diversity and conserve biological diversity. Very prolific writer like Rachel Carson and also Jane Goodall. Just one of these brilliant people who can do science, have a lot of scientific publications, but also can speak to the general public to get them engaged and involved, hopefully, in what they are studying and most interested in. So he'll be referenced quite a bit throughout your readings in this particular module. So what is biodiversity? So again, biodiversity is one of those three basic principles that we covered. So reliability on solar energy, that Earth's life support systems, or reliability on solar energy, the cycling of nutrients, and then also biodiversity. So if we look at this over to the side, those Earth's life support systems, those things, those inputs and outputs, directly affect the natural capital that we talked about before. And in with that, there is an impact to environmental issues that are related to society and those cultural worldviews. But we also have to recognize that if we put a monetary value on those ecosystem services, that it equates to, some people estimate, to over or close to $75 trillion that, again, those natural services, those ecosystem services contribute to our economy, global economy. And it's for free. So again, these are referred to as those ecosystem services. Biodiversity being one of those ecosystem services. Biodiversity includes four basic components that we'll study more so in the next the lecture for this module. It includes functional diversity, ecosystem, or a variety of different habitats diversity, genetic diversities, but perhaps the largest component that kind of drives all the others for the most part is species diversity. And when we think about that term biodiversity, we often think about species diversity. So again, it's the variety and number of different organisms that are living here on Earth. Within this module, we'll talk a little bit about speciation. So speciation is a concept, and I like this because it's a very simplistic way of looking at it, which is great, is that one species becomes two, and how that happens over evolutionary or geological time periods. We'll hit a little bit on evolution. Again, these are things that if you haven't had a science class in quite a while, perhaps spend a little bit more time in the chapter, and also maybe perhaps a little bit more time in the videos that will be embedded and available to you through the lecture. We'll look at Darwin's contribution. He certainly had significant inputs into the concept of evolution through natural selection. And there's this general concept of higher diversity equals greater ecosystem services. And again, if we have to think about it on an economic terms, that could also potentially mean greater economy or more diverse economy. So biodiversity is an important consideration. So with higher diversity and greater ecosystem services, we also have to factor in extinction. So this is one becomes zero concept. So extinction means forever. So that definitely, extinction is a way where biodiversity is depleted. However, if we want to increase diversity, we have to certainly focus and conserve on what we have. A decrease in diversity, again, would mean extinction, and also human impacts, detrimental human impacts on the environment and environmental systems. I mentioned this once before, but most scientists, so throughout geological time period, and we know this based on the fossil record, there have been 5 mass extinctions. Most of us are familiar with just one, where the dinosaurs went extinct. That's the one that we generally think of in terms of extinctions. But there actually have been 6 mass, or 5, and then most scientists certainly believe we are currently in a 6th mass extinction right now. And we'll talk about why this is and how this has come to be. So again, it may have been a while since you've had a science class. So the concept of diversity, 1 becoming 2, was one that Darwin actually depicted early on. So if we look back in his amazing field notes and field journals as he was studying these different organisms on his voyage around the world on the Beagle, he has this simple diagram here where he thought back, he was seeing some commonalities, some patterns, relationships among different fossilized species that he was finding and present day species that he was finding, and how some of the species look similar and different from one another as he traveled from island to island, to continent to continent. And so he depicted this. He had this basic view, or grand view, I should say, not really basic, and this amazing view that one species, we all have a common ancestor, that there are certain common things that all living things share, and then over time we have differentiated with different adaptations to survive in a particular environment. We know this now. We only have to study our own human species to see this. There have been many other Homo sapiens that have lived throughout geological time period, millions of years ago. You can see the different ones depicted here. This isn't all of them. This is just a majority of them that have been well studied. So there's even more to add on to this. So these are human species that once lived here on Earth and perhaps were outcompeted by Homo sapiens. So the current human species, all of us are Homo sapiens. So we're just one species. But again, it's just showing you here that at one point in time we all had a common distant relative or a common ancestor that differentiated based on different adaptations and traits into different human species. So we'll look at this. So how does that happen? And it happens through speciation. So if you have a population, again, this is just kind of a simple visual graphic for you to look at. So if something happens in the environment, you have one particular population here living together, being able to reproduce with one another and produce viable offspring to pass on that genetic information. And then something happens. So perhaps a dam is built, or perhaps a flood happens. But nonetheless, those two populations separate from one another, and they cannot reach one another in order to reproduce, mate and reproduce. And then gradually over time, as you can see here in this graphic, they become distinctly different from one another. So they become different species. And if over time the habitats should overlap once again, these species would not be able to mate or reproduce or produce viable offspring. So they are distinct, different, separate species from one another. So that's, again, it's just a very simplistic overview of how one species can actually become two. Now, this idea of a common species has been, there's just a huge amount of data that has been accumulated to build what's called the tree of life. So a long time ago, when I was going through school in my previous science classes, I was taught there were just kingdoms of different organisms, the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom. And that's changed over recent time. We now have 3 domains of life: bacteria, archaea, and then eukarya. And we fall into that eukarya group. If you look over there, we're very closely related to fungus. So animals are right there. And it includes other things like plants and ciliates. And then archaeobacteria are these species of bacteria that have been around for a long time. They live in these extreme environments. So these are organisms that can generate their own energy. They might be halophytes that live in very salty conditions, halo meaning salt. They may be methanogens, so they live off of methane. So these are organisms that have been around for a very long period of time. And due to some molecular similarities in cellular structure, we're actually more closely related to the archaea than we are bacteria itself. So bacteria, these include things that you're probably familiar with. So cyanobacteria, gram-positive bacteria, filamentous bacteria. So all of life falls into these three basic domains: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya, that you need to be familiar with. And information data supports this through molecular data, morphological similarities that connect all of life to one basic common ancestor. You have an assignment with this module. It's to watch, and it's an hour long, just so you know ahead of time so you can plan your schedule around it. This is Dr. Neil Shubens. This is Your Inner Fish. It's one video in a series of 3 of them, and it just kind of explores the fossil evidence suggesting a common ancestor with tetrapods. If you're not sure what a tetrapod is, he does a great job explaining it. I really hope you enjoy this. This has been a huge hit through my biology and also environmental biology classes over the past couple of years. He's extremely enthusiastic and loves obviously to teach and explore this particular topic. So I hope you enjoy it. There are some questions that will go along with it to turn in, but again, it's about an hour long, so please set aside some time for it. You can go into the PowerPoint, click into it, launch it from there, or copy and paste the link into your web browser. I hope you enjoy.